In the medieval village of Tharndale, a mysterious woman hides behind a black veil, her fingers creating exquisite needlework while whispers follow her every move. For 7 months, she has remained silent, nameless, and alone, until the day a nobleman arrives seeking redemption for a betrayal that destroyed her life. When forced to remove her veil in the village square, she reveals not just her face but a truth that will shake the foundations of the English royal court. What secret lies in the pattern of roses she stitches by candlelight? Why did she choose exile over defending her innocence? And can a heart, shattered by betrayal, ever learn to trust again? Experience the breathtaking journey of Aveline Thornwood, from disgraced seamstress to master of her craft, in a tale of injustice, resilience, and a love that survives even the cruelest deception. Follow our channel for more unforgettable medieval stories that will touch your heart, and don't forget to like and comment to let us know where you're watching from. The church bells of Tharndale village rang through the cold autumn morning, their solemn tones echoing off ancient stone walls and cobbled streets. A thick mist clung to the ground, wrapping around ankles and stone foundations alike, lending an ethereal quality to the awakening village. As the last bell tolled, a solitary figure emerged from the shadows between buildings, moving with small, resigned steps. She appeared like a wraith in the mist, a woman draped entirely in dark garments, her face obscured by a black veil that fell to her chest. Her thin hands, protected by worn gloves with frayed edges, clutched a basket of sewing supplies. The villagers who passed her on their morning errands gave her a wide berth, their curious eyes following her progress through the square. The woman never spoke. She never met anyone's gaze directly. She simply existed among them like a shadow, taking small commissions for mending and sewing to sustain her meager existence. 7 months she had been among them, yet she remained a complete mystery. "I heard she lost her face in a terrible fire," whispered Agnes, the baker's wife, as she arranged fresh loaves in her window display. "That's why she hides behind that veil." "Nonsense," replied Thomas the blacksmith, leaning on his hammer. "My cousin's wife says she killed her bridegroom at the altar, stabbed him through the heart when he revealed he loved another." "Then why isn't she in prison?" questioned young Mary from the tavern. "Because no one knows her true name," Thomas replied with the confidence of a man sharing irrefutable facts. "She appeared here in the dead of winter, begged for shelter from old Widow Harrow, and offered her nimble fingers in exchange for bread and a roof. The mysterious seamstress made her way to the marketplace, where she settled on a wooden stool near the edge of the square. From her basket, she withdrew fabric, needles, and thread. Even in the dim light of the overcast day, her fingers moved with practiced precision, creating intricate patterns and mending tears with invisible stitches. "Lord," Burton's wife approached hesitantly, holding a torn shawl. "Can you mend this by tomorrow?" she asked, her voice unnaturally loud as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. The veiled woman examined the fabric with gentle fingers, then nodded once. No words, just a simple agreement. When Lady Burton placed a few coins in her palm, the woman bowed her head slightly in gratitude. Behind the veil, Aveline Thornwood's eyes stung with unshed tears. Once she had dressed queens and duchesses. Once her name had been whispered with reverence in the finest houses of England. Now she was reduced to mending torn shawls and patching children's clothing, hiding her face and her shame behind a veil of mourning. As the day progressed, the market square filled with villagers going about their business. Children played between stalls, merchants called out their wares, and the routine of village life continued around the silent figure who seemed to exist in her own sphere of solitude. When the evening approached, Aveline gathered her supplies and made her way back through the village. She walked past the cheerful glow of the tavern windows, ignoring the curious stares that followed her. Her lodgings were in the back room of an abandoned inn at the edge of the village, a dilapidated building that had once welcomed weary travelers, but now stood as a hollow reminder of better days. The single room she occupied was sparsely furnished. A narrow bed, a wooden table that served as her workstation, and a small chest containing her few belongings. A single candle provided the only light, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Aveline placed her basket on the table and removed her gloves with careful movements. In the privacy of her room, she allowed her shoulders to slump, the weight of her secrets pressing down upon her like a physical burden. A soft knock at her door startled her. Quickly adjusting her veil, she opened it to find a small boy of perhaps 6 years standing there clutching a torn stuffed bear. "Mother says you can fix anything," he said, his wide eyes trying to peer through the black fabric that concealed her features. "Can you fix Birdie? He's torn his arm." Aveline took the toy gently, examining the loose stitching where the arm had begun to separate from the body. She nodded and gestured for the boy to wait. With swift, practiced movements, she threaded a needle and began to repair the bear. The boy watched, mesmerized by her quick, precise stitches. "You're magic," he whispered. "Mother says you might be a witch, but I don't think so. Witches can't make things beautiful." Aveline's hands stilled for a moment before continuing their work. Children's words often carried the unfiltered thoughts of their parents, and she had grown accustomed to the suspicion that surrounded her. She finished the repair and handed the bear back to the child. "Thank you," he said, hugging the toy tightly. Then in a moment of innocent confusion he added, "Goodbye, Mother," and darted away into the gathering darkness. The word struck Aveline like a physical blow. She closed the door quickly and leaned against it, her body trembling as she fought to contain the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Mother. Such a simple word, yet it carried the weight of dreams she had once harbored. Dreams now turned to ash, like everything else in her former life. When her breathing steadied, she moved to the small window and looked out at the night sky. Stars were beginning to appear above the thatched roofs of Tharndale, cold and distant. In another life, she had gazed at these same stars from the gardens of palaces, her future spread before her like an unwritten page. Slowly, her fingers rose to the edge of her veil. In the privacy of her room, she lifted it, revealing a face that would have silenced the village gossip instantly. There were no burn scars, no disfigurement, only the perfect features of a woman in her late 30s, with high cheekbones, full lips and eyes that held a profound sadness. Her beauty remained unchanged, a cruel reminder of all she had lost. A single tear traced its way down her cheek as she whispered into the empty room, "Forgive me, Father. I failed to protect your legacy." Her father, Master Thornwood, had been the most celebrated royal tailor in England, his creations adorning the nobility for 3 decades. He had trained Aveline since childhood, passing on his extraordinary skills, with needle and thread, preparing her to continue his legacy. But one false accusation, one moment of betrayal, had shattered everything they had built together. From a loose floorboard beneath her bed, Aveline withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth from frequent handling. Inside lay a piece of parchment, a royal commission that would never be fulfilled, and a scrap of fabric embroidered with an intricate pattern of thornwood roses, her father's signature motif. "They took everything from us," she whispered, tracing the pattern with her fingertip. "But they could not take this." The skill in her hands, the knowledge passed down through generations, these remained hers, even when her name and honor had been stripped away. As she returned the box to its hiding place, a shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. Something was changing in the air, a shift in the fabric of her carefully constructed isolation. For 7 months she had existed in this half-life, neither truly living nor dead, suspended in a limbo of her own making. But fate, like the finest silk, could unravel with a single pull of the thread, and somewhere unknown to her, that thread had already begun to move. In her dreams that night, Aveline returned to the royal court, to the moment when everything changed, the accusing finger pointing at her, the shock on the faces of those who had once praised her work, the cruel smile on the lips of the man who had betrayed her, Sir Edmund Blackthorne, heir to the powerful house of Blackthorne whose words had condemned her. She awoke with a start, her heart pounding, the name on her lips. Edmund. Little did she know that miles away, the very man who haunted her dreams was preparing for a journey that would bring him to Tharndale. A journey that would tear away the veil she had hidden behind and expose the truth that lay beneath. A truth that could shake the very foundations of the English court. The candle beside her bed guttered and died, plunging the room into darkness, like her life, consumed by shadows. But even in the darkest night, a single spark can ignite a flame. And Aveline Thornwood's flame was about to burn brighter than anyone could imagine. The first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in hues of amber and rose as a solitary rider approached the outskirts of Tharndale. His cloak, simple and worn, concealed the fine craftsmanship of his boots and the noble bearing of his shoulders. Sir Edmund Blackthorne, heir to one of England's most influential families, had exchanged his courtly attire for the rough garments of a common traveler. The stubble on his jaw and the dust of the road completed his disguise. His eyes, the deep blue of a summer sky, surveyed the village as it came to life before him. Smoke curled from chimneys, doors opened to admit the crisp, morning air, and the first vendors began setting up their stalls in the market square. Edmund guided his horse toward the village inn, his heart heavy with the weight of his mission. 7 months had passed since he had spoken those damning words in the Queen's court, pointing an accusing finger at the royal tailor's daughter when the Queen's sapphire necklace had disappeared. It must have been the seamstress, he had declared, his voice carrying across the stunned silence of the hall. She was alone with Her Majesty during the final fitting. The memory of Aveline Thornwood's face in that moment, the shock, the betrayal, the silent plea in her eyes, had haunted his dreams ever since. But he had been desperate to protect Lady Catherine Montgomery, his secret lover, whom he had glimpsed slipping the necklace into her sleeve when she thought no one was watching. Edmund dismounted outside the inn, his boots landing with a soft thud on the muddy ground. The stable boy hurried forward to take his horse, eyeing the quality of the animal with undisguised appreciation. "Fine beast, sir," the boy commented, running a hand along the horse's neck. "Not many like this pass through Tharndale." "I've come a long way," Edmund replied, his voice deliberately roughened to mask his aristocratic accent. "I seek rest and perhaps information." The innkeeper, a rotund man with a perpetually suspicious gaze, showed Edmund to a small room on the upper floor. "What brings a man like yourself to our humble village?" he asked, lingering in the doorway. "We don't see many travelers since the main road was rerouted." Edmund dropped a few coins into the man's palm. "I search for someone, a woman who may have passed through here in the last year." The innkeeper's eyebrows rose. "Many women in Tharndale, sir. Any particular one?" "She would have skills with a needle." "Exceptional skills." Edmund kept his tone casual, though his heart raced at finally speaking the words aloud. "A seamstress of uncommon talent." A flicker of recognition passed across the innkeeper's face. "Ah, you mean the veiled woman. Arrived in the dead of winter, she did. Never speaks, never shows her face. Keeps to herself in the old abandoned inn at the edge of the village." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Some say she's hiding from something or someone." Edmund's fingers tightened around the strap of his travel bag. Could it be her? After months of discreet inquiries and false leads, had he finally found Aveline Thornwood? "This woman," he asked carefully, "what do you know of her past?" The innkeeper shrugged. "Nothing. She appeared one night half frozen in the snow. Old Widow Harrow took her in at first, but she's been in the abandoned inn since spring. Does mending and such for the villagers. Fine work, they say, but strange, keeping to herself like that." After the innkeeper left, Edmund sat on the edge of the narrow bed, his head in his hands. The death of his mother 2 months ago had changed everything. Lady Eleanor Blackthorne had called him to her deathbed, her once strong voice reduced to a whisper. "I know what you did, Edmund," she had said, her fingers clutching his with surprising strength. "I know you accused the Thornwood girl to protect Catherine Montgomery." The shock must have shown on his face, for she had continued. "A mother knows her son's heart. Catherine was seen with the necklace later. The Queen herself suspects, but without proof." She had paused, her breathing labored. Find the girl, Edmund. Make it right. Your father built our name on honor. Do not let it end with dishonor. Those had been her final words to him. The next morning, Lady Eleanor Blackthorne had passed peacefully in her sleep, leaving Edmund with the crushing weight of his guilt and her final command. Now, after months of searching, he might be mere steps away from the woman whose life he had destroyed. As afternoon approached, Edmund ventured into the village square, his eyes scanning the modest market for any sign of a veiled figure. Instead, his attention was drawn to a small workshop where an elderly man bent over a piece of leather, his gnarled fingers working methodically. "Good day," Edmund greeted, approaching the craftsman. "I wonder if you might assist me." The old man looked up, rheumy eyes assessing Edmund with surprising sharpness. "Depends on what you're after, young sir." "Information about a woman in this village. One who keeps her face veiled." The leatherworker's hand stilled. "Why do you seek her?" Edmund hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I believe I may have done her a great wrong. I wish to make amends." A harsh laugh escaped the old man's lips. "Amends? Some wrongs can't be mended, boy. Not with words, not with gold." He returned to his work, dismissing Edmund with the set of his shoulders. But Edmund persisted. "Please, anything you can tell me about her would—" "There she is now," the old man interrupted, nodding toward the far side of the square. Edmund turned, his breath catching in his throat. A slender figure in dark clothing moved between the stalls, a basket over one arm. The black veil that covered her face fell to her chest, concealing any glimpse of her features. But something in the graceful way she moved, the delicate precision of her gloved hands as they selected a loaf of bread from the baker's stall, sent a jolt of recognition through him. Without conscious thought, Edmund found himself moving toward her, drawn by an invisible thread of fate and remorse. He stopped several paces away, suddenly unsure. What would he say? How could he possibly begin to undo the damage he had caused as, if sensing his presence, the veiled woman turned slightly? Though he could not see her eyes, Edmund felt her gaze upon him. Felt it like a physical touch, assessing and then dismissing him as she turned away. In that moment, something inexplicable passed between them. A current of recognition that transcended sight or sound. Edmund's heart pounded against his ribs as though trying to escape the confines of his chest. It was her. He knew it with a certainty that defied explanation. The woman continued on her way, pausing at the windowsill of a small cottage where several pieces of fabric lay spread for her inspection. Her hands, those elegant instruments of her art, moved over the materials with reverent appreciation. Edmund remained rooted to the spot, watching her from a distance. The guilt that had driven him here now mingled with something else, a fascination, a desperate need to understand the woman whose life he had so carelessly upended. As the veiled figure finished her business and began to move away from the square, Edmund finally found the courage to follow. He maintained a respectful distance, trailing her to the edge of the village where a dilapidated building stood apart from the others, the abandoned inn the innkeeper had mentioned. She disappeared inside, the door closing firmly behind her. Edmund stood in the road, staring at the weathered building as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across its facade. Behind those walls lived the woman he had wronged so grievously. Behind that veil was the face that had haunted his conscience for 7 long months. "Tomorrow," he whispered to himself, a promise and a prayer. "Tomorrow I will find the courage to face what I have done." As he turned to walk back to the inn, a chill breeze stirred the leaves at his feet. Winter was approaching, bringing with it the promise of darkness and cold. But perhaps, if fate was kind, it might also bring the possibility of redemption. The village of Tharndale transformed itself under the golden light of dozens of torches and lanterns. The annual October Fair had arrived, bringing with it a riot of colors, scents, and sounds that banished the usual quiet of the medieval hamlet. Garlands of autumn leaves and dried flowers adorned the market square, while merchants from neighboring towns displayed their finest wares on tables draped with colorful cloths. Villagers donned their best attire, faces flushed with excitement. As they moved between stalls laden with spiced wine, fresh bread, and trinkets rarely seen in their isolated community, children darted through the crowd, their laughter rising above the music played by a trio of minstrels near the village well. Edmund Blackthorne stood at the edge of the celebration, his simple clothing allowing him to blend with the common folk. For 3 days he had watched the veiled woman from a distance, his courage failing whenever he contemplated approaching her. Tonight, however, something felt different. As if the festive atmosphere had loosened the knot of guilt that had tightened around his heart since his arrival. Across the square, partially hidden in the shadow of the baker's stall, sat the object of his torment. The veiled woman worked silently, her nimble fingers crafting masks from scraps of fabric and ribbons. A small crowd of children had gathered around her makeshift workshop, watching in awe as plain cloth transformed into whimsical faces of animals and forest creatures under her skilled hands. "How does she do it so quickly?" one boy whispered to his companion. "My mother takes forever just to mend my trousers." "Magic," replied the other child solemnly. "My father says she's not natural. That's why she hides her face." The casual cruelty of the comment struck Edmund like a physical blow. This was the legacy of his lie, a woman of extraordinary talent reduced to an object of superstition and fear. Before he could reconsider, his feet carried him toward her stall. The children scattered as he approached, disappearing into the crowd like startled deer. The veiled woman continued her work, apparently oblivious to his presence, until he stood directly before her. Then her hands stilled, the half-finished fox mask lying forgotten in her lap. Though he couldn't see her face, Edmund felt the weight of her gaze through the black veil. The moment stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "Your work is remarkable," he finally said, his voice soft enough that only she could hear. "Truly the hand of a master." She remained motionless, giving no acknowledgement of his compliment. Up close, Edmund could see the fine quality of her gloves, worn now but once expensive, and the precise stitching of her simple dress. Even in poverty, her craftsmanship showed in everything she touched. "How much for a mask?" he asked, gesturing to the small collection displayed on her table. She lifted a piece of slate on which prices were chalked, still without speaking. Edmund selected a mask shaped like a woodland stag, its antlers formed from twisted leather strips, and its eyes rimmed with tiny glass beads that caught the torchlight. "This one, please," he said, placing 3 times the listed price in her palm. Her head tilted slightly, a silent question at his generosity. "It's worth far more," he explained, surprised by the thickness in his throat. "Art like this always is." For a fleeting moment, her fingers brushed against his as she accepted the payment. A touch so light it might have been imagined, yet it sent a tremor through Edmund's entire being. Something familiar resided in that touch, awakening memories he had long suppressed. A small girl appeared at his elbow, gazing longingly at a butterfly mask trimmed with blue ribbons. Her clothing marked her as one of the village's orphans, cared for communally but belonging to no one. Following an impulse he didn't fully understand, Edmund reached for the butterfly mask. "This one as well," he said, placing more coins on the kirpo table. When the veiled woman handed him the delicate creation, he knelt beside the wide-eyed child. "For you," he said, offering her the mask. "Every butterfly needs a garden to call home." The girl's face transformed with wonder as she accepted the gift, her fingers reverently tracing the contours of the fabric wings. "Thank you, sir," she whispered before darting away to show her treasure to the other children. When Edmund turned back, he found the veiled woman watching him, her hands perfectly still on her lap. Though he couldn't see her expression, he sensed something had shifted. Between them, some tiny crack in the wall of her isolation. "I've taken enough of your time," he said, bowing slightly. "Thank you for the mask." As he walked away, he felt her eyes following him through the crowd, and for the first time since arriving in Tharndale, the weight of his guilt seemed a fraction lighter. The evening progressed, the fair growing more boisterous as villagers indulged in ale and mead. Edmund wandered through the celebration, the stag mask hanging from his belt, a constant reminder of the woman who had created it. Occasionally he caught glimpses of her moving through the crowd, always apart, always observed but never included. Near midnight, as the festivities reached their peak, a commotion erupted near the tavern door. Edmund pushed his way through the gathered onlookers to find the veiled woman cornered by three young women, whose flushed faces and unsteady movements betrayed their intoxication. "Come now, mystery lady," taunted the tallest of the three, a blonde with a pretty face distorted by malicious curiosity. "The fair is for showing your true self. Take off that veil and join the fun." The veiled woman tried to step around them, but another girl blocked her path. "We've all wondered what you're hiding," she said, reaching for the edge of the black fabric. "Is it burns? A birthmark? Or are you just too hideous to face the light of day?" Before Edmund could intervene, the blonde lurched forward and grabbed the veil, yanking hard enough that the woman stumbled backward against the tavern wall. The veil held, but a collective gasp rose from the watching crowd. "Enough." Edmund's voice cut through the tense silence as he stepped between the women. "Have you no shame? Leave her be." The blonde's eyes narrowed as she took in his appearance. "And who are you to tell us what to do? Her protector? Or are you curious about what's under that veil too?" "I am someone who recognizes cruelty when I see it," Edmund replied, his tone carrying the authority he had temporarily abandoned with his noble attire. "This woman has done nothing to deserve your torment. Return to your revelry and leave her in peace." Something in his stance, perhaps the unconscious bearing of a man accustomed to command, made the young women hesitate. After a moment of tension, they retreated, muttering among themselves as they disappeared back into the crowd. Edmund turned to the veiled woman, who stood perfectly still against the wall. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She shook her head slightly, then, to his surprise, raised her eyes to meet his directly. Though he could not see through the black fabric, Edmund felt the intensity of her gaze like a physical force. For the first time since his arrival in Tharndale, he sensed that she truly saw him, not as a stranger but as someone she might recognize. "I know you," he said softly, the words escaping before he could reconsider. "Don't I?" The woman took a step back, her body language shifting from gratitude to wariness in an instant. Without a word, she turned and moved swiftly away from him, weaving through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to avoiding notice. Edmund stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the certainty that had seized him. It was her. Aveline Thornwood, the woman whose life he had destroyed with a single accusation. The realization both elated and terrified him. What could he possibly say to earn her forgiveness? How could he begin to make amends for the devastation he had wrought? As he pondered these impossible questions, something caught his eye. A small square of fabric lying on the ground where the veiled woman had stood. Edmund bent to retrieve it, turning it over in his hands. It was a handkerchief, the corners, embroidered with an intricate pattern of thornwood roses surrounding a stylized E. His breath caught in his throat. He recognized this handkerchief. He had commissioned it himself years ago from Master Thornwood as a gift for his sister Elizabeth. But during the fitting, when young Aveline had shown him the sample of her embroidery work, he had been so impressed that he had asked for a duplicate for himself. "You kept it," he whispered, his fingers tracing the delicate stitches. All these years, the knowledge that she had preserved this small token of their brief acquaintance before the tragedy struck him with unexpected force. In the midst of the fair's continuing revelry, Edmund clutched the handkerchief to his chest, a bittersweet smile playing across his lips. Perhaps redemption was not as impossible as he had feared. Tomorrow, he would find her again. Tomorrow, he would finally speak the truth that had haunted him for 7 long months. But tonight, under the stars and the glow of the October fair, Edmund Blackthorne allowed himself to hope, a dangerous luxury for a man with so much to atone for. The candle guttered in its holder as Aveline secured the latch on her door. Her heart still raced from the encounter at the fair, her fingers trembling as she untied the ribbons of her veil. In the privacy of her small room, She allowed the black fabric to slip away, revealing features drawn tight with anxiety and eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. It couldn't be him. It wasn't possible. After 7 months of exile and disgrace, Sir Edmund Blackthorne could not possibly have appeared in this remote village, speaking to her with kindness, defending her against cruelty. The world was not so small, nor fate so cruel. Yet she had recognized him instantly. Despite his commoner's attire and the stubble darkening his jaw, those eyes remained unchanged, deep blue and piercing, as if they could see through all pretenses to the truth beneath. The same eyes that had once gazed at her with admiration when she had presented her embroidery samples at court, and later with cold accusation when he had named her a thief before the Queen and her assembled nobles. Aveline moved to the worn floorboards beneath her bed and knelt, her fingers finding the loose plank that concealed her most precious possessions. From this hiding place she withdrew a wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl, the last gift her father had given her before his death. The tiny key hung around her neck on a simple leather cord, and she turned it in the lock with practiced care. Inside, nestled among a few pieces of jewelry too precious to sell even in her darkest hours of need, lay an unfinished garment of cream-colored silk, its bodice partially embroidered with silver thread and tiny seed pearls. The Queen's gown, the masterpiece that was to have established Aveline as her father's true successor. "I never even finished your sleeves," she whispered, running her fingers over the intricate pattern. 7 months ago, this gown had represented the pinnacle of her ambitions. Now it stood as a monument to all she had lost. Beside the gown lay a smaller bundle wrapped in linen. Aveline unwound it slowly, revealing a handkerchief identical to the one she had dropped at the fair, its twin, commissioned by Edmund Blackthorne all those years ago. She had kept both, unable to part with this tangible connection to the man she had once admired from afar. Foolish girl, she chided herself, pressing the handkerchief to her cheek. Even now, knowing what he did, you'd cherish his token. The truth was more complicated than the villagers could ever guess. Aveline had not fled the court merely to escape the shame of a false accusation. She had fled to protect her father's name and legacy. A legacy that extended far beyond fine gowns and embroidery to secrets that could shake the very foundations of the royal court. Closing her eyes, Aveline allowed herself to remember that fateful day 7 months ago. The memory unfurled like a tapestry in her mind, each detail preserved with painful clarity. The Queen's private chambers had been alive with activity, ladies in waiting arranging jewelry, maids preparing the royal bath, and Aveline herself making final adjustments to Her Majesty's new gown for the spring banquet. The sapphire necklace, a gift from the King on their 20th anniversary, had lain on a velvet cushion near the window, its stones capturing the afternoon light in their deep blue depths. During the fitting, Lady Catherine Montgomery had entered, ostensibly to deliver a message from the King. Her eyes had lingered on the necklace, and Aveline, focused on pinning a stubborn seam, had thought nothing of it. When the Queen was called away to attend to an urgent matter, Aveline found herself alone with Lady Catherine for several minutes. Later, when the necklace was discovered missing, panic had erupted. Guards searched every inch of the chamber while the Queen's lady stood trembling under the steward's suspicious gaze. Then Sir Edmund Blackthorne, summoned to assist in the investigation due to his family's close ties to the crown, had entered the room. His eyes had swept over the assembled women, pausing momentarily on Lady Catherine before settling on Aveline. In that brief glance, Aveline had seen something terrible, a decision being made, a sacrifice calculated. It must have been the seamstress, he had declared, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. She was alone with Her Majesty during the final fitting. The accusation had fallen like a physical blow. Guards had seized her arms while she protested her innocence, dragging her from the chamber as the court looked on with contempt, and Lady Catherine watched with carefully composed concern. Only the Queen had seemed uncertain, her brow furrowed as she observed the scene unfolding before her. No evidence was found to support the accusation, but neither was there proof of Aveline's innocence. Released from the palace dungeons after 3 days of questioning, She had returned home to find her father collapsed in his workshop, a letter clutched in his hand. The royal commission had been revoked, their family name disgraced. 2 days later, Master Thornwood died of a broken heart, leaving Aveline alone with her grief and the knowledge that something far more sinister than a simple theft had occurred. Among her father's papers, she had discovered correspondence that hinted at court intrigues far deeper than she had ever suspected, intrigues in which the Blackthorn family played a central role. Fearing for her safety, and with nothing left to lose, Aveline had gathered what little remained of value, donned the veil of a grieving daughter, and disappeared into the countryside. 7 months of hiding, of silent suffering, had led her to this moment, face to face once more with the architect of her downfall. A sharp knock at her door startled Aveline from her reverie. Hastily replacing the gown and handkerchief in their box, she secured it beneath the floorboard and readjusted her veil before opening the door. Old Thomas, the village blacksmith, stood on her threshold, his weathered face grave in the dim light. "Forgive the late hour, mistress," he said, his voice low. "But there's a man asking questions about you in the village. A stranger, dressed as a commoner but speaking with the tongue of nobility." Aveline's pulse quickened, but she merely inclined, her head to show she was listening. "He came to my forge this afternoon," Thomas continued. "Asked if I knew anything of a skilled seamstress who arrived in winter. I told him nothing, of course, but..." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before leaning closer. "I recognized him, mistress. I was in London 3 years past, delivering commissioned work to the palace. That man is Sir Edmund Blackthorn, heir to the Blackthorn estate. Whatever your secrets are, they've followed you here." Aveline's fingers tightened on the door frame. Though her posture betrayed nothing of her inner turmoil, she nodded once in thanks for the warning. As Thomas turned to leave, he added, "There's one more thing." The old tanner, Willem, spoke with him at length. "Willem knew your father in his youth. They apprenticed together before your father was called to court. If anyone might reveal your true identity, it would be him." After the blacksmith departed, Aveline closed her door and leaned against it, her mind racing. Willem, the reclusive tanner who lived at the edge of the forest, she had avoided him precisely because of his connection to her father. If he recognized her, if he spoke to Edmund, she had to see Willem immediately before it was too late. Wrapping a cloak around her shoulders, Aveline slipped out into the night. The village streets were quiet after the fair, with only a few revelers still making their unsteady way home. She kept to the shadows, moving swiftly toward the small hut where the elderly tanner plied his trade. A light still burned in Willem's window as she approached. Gathering her courage, Aveline knocked softly on his door. The old man who answered seemed unsurprised to see her. "I wondered when you would come," he said, stepping aside to let her enter. "The veil doesn't hide you from those who knew Matthias Thornwood's smile. You have his eyes, child." Inside the humble dwelling, Willem gestured for her to sit. "He came to me today, the Blackthorn boy, asking about you." "What did you tell him?" Aveline asked, speaking aloud for the first time in months, her voice rough from disuse. Willem's rheumy eyes studied her with compassion. "I told him that some women wear veils not because they are marked, but because they were marked by someone without courage." He placed a gnarled hand over hers. "I've watched you these 7 months, child. A woman in hiding but not in shame. Whatever drove you from court, it wasn't theft." Tears welled in Aveline's eyes, blurring her vision. "My father, Matthias, was the finest man I ever knew," Willem interrupted gently, "and the most loyal. Too loyal, perhaps, to those who did not deserve it." Before Aveline could respond, the old man's face contorted in pain. He clutched at his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "My heart," he whispered, collapsing against her. Aveline caught him, easing his frail body to the floor. "Willem, hold on, I'll fetch help." His fingers tightened around her wrist with surprising strength. "No time," he rasped. "Listen, your father, the Queen's secrets." His voice faded as his eyes unfocused, staring at something Aveline could not see. The Blackthorn boy seeks redemption. The truth lies in the rose pattern. Your father knew. He always knew. With a final shuddering breath, Willem's hand went slack in hers. Aveline bent her head, tears flowing freely behind her veil as she mourned this last connection to her father's past. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps sent her scrambling to her feet. Someone was coming, someone who must not find her, here with Willem's body. Moving to the back door, Aveline slipped into the night just as a knock sounded at the front of the cottage. As she hurried back toward the village, Willem's final words echoed in her mind. The truth lies in the rose pattern. What had her father known? What secrets were hidden in the embroidery designs he had taught her with such care? And what would Edmund Blackthorn do when he discovered who truly hid behind the veil? A commotion, unlike anything Tharndale had witnessed in years, erupted at the village edge as 3 ornate carriages rolled through the narrow streets, their polished wood gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Village children abandoned their chores to run alongside the procession, marveling at the prancing horses with their braided manes, and the liveried footmen who maintained stony expressions despite the excitement they caused. In the market square, villagers gathered in hushed clusters, speculation running wild. Royal envoys? Suggested the baker's wife. Tax collectors? Worried the blacksmith. But as the lead carriage door swung open, revealing a woman draped in luxurious furs and silks, the whispers intensified. Lady Millicent Hargrove, announced, the innkeeper with authority. Cousin to the Duke of Westmoreland. What business could she possibly have in Tharndale? Lady Millicent descended from her carriage with practiced grace, her crimson gown rustling as she surveyed the humble surroundings with barely concealed disdain. 2 ladies-in-waiting fluttered at her sides like nervous birds, adjusting her fur-trimmed cloak and smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirts. "This is the place?" she asked, her aristocratic voice carrying across the suddenly silent square. "This village is where we're to wait?" The eldest of her companions nodded. "The bridge at Hampton Fort has collapsed, my lady. The royal road is impassable until repairs are made. The messenger said we must remain here for at least 3 days. Lady Millicent's painted lips tightened in displeasure. 3 days in this backwater? Intolerable. We're expected at Westmoreland Castle for the betrothal celebrations." Edmund Blackthorn observed the scene from the shadow of the apothecary's shop, his heart racing with unexpected fear. He recognized Lady Millicent immediately. She had been present at court the day of Aveline's disgrace, her voice among the loudest condemning the common thief. If she recognized either him or Aveline, all hope of quietly resolving the situation would vanish. Across the square, the veiled figure of Aveline emerged from her small dwelling, basket in hand for her daily marketing. Edmund saw the precise moment when she noticed the commotion. Her steps faltered, her posture stiffened, and though her face remained hidden, he sensed her sudden terror. Before either could retreat, Lady Millicent's gaze fell upon Aveline. The noblewoman's eyes narrowed, not in recognition, but in curiosity at the unusual sight of the veiled woman. "You there, the woman in black," she called imperiously. "Come forward." Aveline remained frozen, one foot slightly behind the other, as if poised for flight. The villagers watched with bated breath, many crossing themselves superstitiously at this confrontation between their mysterious seamstress and the haughty noblewoman. "Are you deaf as well as hidden?" Lady Millicent demanded. I said come forward. With visible reluctance, Aveline approached and curtsied low, her movements betraying the court training that 7 months of exile had failed to erase. Lady Millicent circled her like a predator, assessing the simple but well-made garments and the quality of the stitching visible even on Aveline's plain dress. "You have skill with a needle," she observed. "My traveling gown was torn when that fool driver hit a rut. You will repair it. Immediately." It wasn't a request. Aveline inclined her head in silent acceptance. "Excellent." "Agnes," Lady Millicent snapped her fingers at one of her ladies. "Fetch the blue silk from my trunk. The girl can work here, in the square, where I can observe her progress." Her lips curved in a cold smile. "I do so love to watch skilled hands at work," Within minutes, a portable table and stool were arranged in the center of the square. Aveline was seated before the damaged gown, an exquisite creation of French silk embroidered with silver thread, while Lady Millicent installed herself on a chair borrowed from the tavern, her entourage hovering nearby and most of the village, watching from a respectful distance. Edmund lingered on the periphery, tension coiling in his stomach. The public spectacle felt deliberate, designed to humiliate rather than merely obtain necessary repairs. He had seen Lady Millicent employ similar tactics at court, creating entertainment from the discomfort of those she considered beneath her. As Aveline's nimble fingers began their work, Lady Millicent's sharp eyes detected something in the seamstress's technique. "Where did you learn that stitch?" she demanded suddenly. "That is no common method." Aveline's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their rhythm, offering no response. "I asked you a question, girl," Lady Millicent persisted, leaning forward. "That is a court technique. No village seamstress would know it." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Edmund took an involuntary step forward, then forced himself to stop. Intervention now would only draw unwanted attention. "Perhaps she cannot—" "Speak, my lady," suggested the innkeeper obsequiously. "She has never uttered a word in the 7 months she's been among us." 7 months, Lady Millicent repeated thoughtfully. How curious. It was 7 months ago that the court scandal. Her eyes widened with sudden interest. "Remove your veil," she commanded. Aveline's shoulders tensed, but her hands continued their steady work. "Did you not hear me? I said remove your veil." Lady Millicent's voice rose sharply. "I would see the face of the woman who presumes to repair." "My finest gown." When Aveline made no move to comply, Lady Millicent's patience evaporated. She rose from her chair, crossed to the table in 3 swift strides, and seized the edge of the black fabric. "What deformity do you hide? What shame?" she hissed, her fingers twisting in the veil. The crowd gasped collectively, villagers pressing forward for a better view of the spectacle. Edmund could bear it no longer. Breaking from his concealment, he strode into the center of the square. "Stop!" His voice rang out with the authority of his noble upbringing, halting Lady Millicent mid-motion. "Release her at once." The noblewoman turned, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized him despite his common attire. "Sir Edmund Blackthorne, what on earth—" "Let go of her veil, Lady Millicent," he repeated, quieter now but no less commanding. "This woman deserves your respect, not your scorn." Lady Millicent's painted lips curved into a malicious smile. "Respect? For a village seamstress who hides her face unless—" Her eyes darted between Edmund and the veiled figure, calculating. "Unless she is more than she appears. How fascinating." Aveline stood suddenly, the blue silk gown falling forgotten to the ground. The square had gone deathly quiet, every eye fixed on the tableau of the nobleman, the lady, and the mysterious veiled woman caught between them. "Show us," Lady Millicent demanded, her voice carrying across the silent square. "Show us what you hide beneath that mourning veil. Or are you a coward as well as a mute?" Edmund moved to intervene again, but Aveline raised her hand, stopping him with the simple gesture. For 7 months she had hidden, had surrendered her voice and her identity, had endured whispers and suspicion. In that moment, something shifted. Within her, a quiet dignity rising to replace the fear that had been her constant companion. With steady hands, she reached for the ribbons that secured her veil. The sound of her voice, unused for so long, startled the gathered crowd as much as her words. "The only coward here," she said clearly, "is the one who condemns without justice." The veil fell away, revealing a face of extraordinary beauty. High, cheekbones, luminous skin, and eyes that held both sorrow and defiance. A collective gasp rose from the villagers, followed by urgent whispers as they beheld the woman who had lived among them in silent mystery. Lady Millicent stepped back, genuine, shock replacing her malicious curiosity. "You. I know you." "Yes," Aveline replied, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You were there, Lady Millicent, the day I was falsely accused. You joined the chorus calling for my punishment without trial or evidence." Recognition dawned across the noblewoman's features. The royal tailor's daughter, the thief who stole the queen's sapphire necklace. I stole nothing, Aveline stated, her gaze unwavering. I was innocent then as I am now. The villagers' whispers grew louder, confusion and surprise evident on their faces as they struggled to reconcile the silent, mysterious seamstress with this revelation of court intrigue and noble connections. Edmund stepped forward, placing himself between Aveline and Lady Millicent. She speaks the truth, he declared, his voice carrying across the square. And I am the one who wronged her. Dropping to his knees before Aveline, unmindful of the mud that soiled his breeches or the gasps of the onlookers, Edmund bowed his head in abject humility. It was I who accused you falsely, I who destroyed your life and your father's with a lie. He looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I have searched for you for months, Aveline Thornwood, to confess my crime and beg forgiveness that I do not deserve. Aveline stared down at him, her face a complex tapestry of emotion. Shock, grief, anger, and something else, something indefinable that flickered in the depths of her eyes. You, she whispered, the single word laden with 7 months of pain. You gave me the door. Now you will see what I did with it. She turned to face the gathered crowd, standing tall and unashamed for the first time since that fateful day at court. The sunlight caught the tears on her cheeks, transforming them to diamonds that matched the brilliance of her unveiled eyes. My name is Aveline Thornwood, she announced, her voice clear and strong. Daughter of Master Matthias Thornwood, royal, tailor to Her Majesty the Queen. I am no thief, no witch, no shameful creature to be hidden away. I am a master of my craft, wrongfully accused and unjustly exiled. Her gaze swept over the villagers who had speculated about her for months, and I will hide no longer. In that moment, transformed by truth and courage, Aveline appeared more regal than Lady Millicent with all her silks and jewels. The villagers who had feared and avoided her for so long now looked upon her with new eyes, seeing not a mysterious specter, but a woman of extraordinary dignity, who had endured their suspicion with grace. Edmund remained on his knees, his confession hanging in the air between them, a bridge partially built across the chasm of betrayal, waiting to see if it would be crossed or destroyed. 3 days after the confrontation in the village square, Tharndale remained abuzz with whispers and speculation. Lady Millicent had departed with her entourage as soon as the bridge was repaired, no doubt carrying tales of the dramatic revelation back to court. Aveline, no longer veiled but still keeping to herself, had returned to her small room at the abandoned inn, uncertain of her future now that her identity was known. The morning mist still clung to the cobblestones when the sound of approaching hooves drew villagers from their homes. Unlike Lady Millicent's ostentatious procession, this new arrival consisted of a single carriage, elegant but understated, bearing the royal insignia on its doors. Edmund, who had taken to watching Aveline's dwelling from a respectful distance, straightened as the carriage halted in the square. The driver, clad in the Queen's livery, descended and opened the door with practiced ceremony. A collective gasp rose from the gathering crowd as a slender woman emerged, her simple gown of deep blue velvet and the subtle coronet in her gray-streaked hair marking her unmistakably as Queen Eleanor of England. Though she traveled with only 2 attendants, a lady-in-waiting and a royal guard, her presence transformed the humble village square into an impromptu court. "Where is she?" The Queen asked, her voice gentle yet commanding. "Where is Aveline Thornwood?" Edmund stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I did not expect—" "Sir Edmund," the Queen acknowledged with a slight nod. "I received Lady Millicent's message yesterday. Some matters cannot wait for formal channels." Her eyes, shrewd and assessing, studied him for a moment. "Your mother would be proud of your courage if not your methods." Before Edmund could respond, a hushed murmur ran through the crowd as Aveline appeared at the edge of the square. She moved hesitantly, her face unveiled but her eyes downcast until she stood before the Queen. With perfect grace, she sank into a deep curtsy, her head bowed in deference. "Rise, child," the Queen commanded softly. "Look at me." Aveline obeyed, lifting her gaze to meet the monarch's. The queen studied her face for a long moment, then did something that shocked everyone present. She stepped forward and embraced Aveline like a long-lost daughter. "I always knew the truth," she whispered, though her words carried in the hushed square. "I never believed you capable of such theft, but I did not know where to find you when you disappeared." Tears welled in Aveline's eyes as the queen released her. "Your Majesty, Not here," the queen interrupted gently. "There are matters we must discuss in private." She glanced around at the awestruck villagers and added, "Is there somewhere we might speak undisturbed?" Minutes later, the improbable trio of queen, noblewoman, and seamstress sat in Aveline's humble room at the abandoned inn. The queen's attendants remained outside, keeping curious onlookers at bay while Edmund stood uncomfortably by the door, uncertain of his place in this reunion. 7 months I have wondered about the sapphire necklace," the queen began, her fingers absently touching her throat where the missing jewels had once rested. Not for its value, though it was considerable, but for the betrayal it represented. "I never took it, Your Majesty," Aveline said softly. "I would have died rather than betray your trust." "I know." The queen's smile held sadness. "Just as I know who did take it." Edmund's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "You know, Lady Catherine Montgomery," the queen stated simply. "She's been my lady-in-waiting for 6 years, Sir Edmund. Did you think I was blind to her ambitions? Or to your attachment to her?" Color flooded Edmund's face as the queen continued. "The necklace was found 3 months ago in a chest in Lady Catherine's chambers. She claimed it had been planted there by enemies seeking her downfall." The queen's voice hardened slightly. A convenient explanation, and one that might have been believable had the matching earrings not been discovered in her possession in Florence, where she fled when the investigation began. Aveline's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. "Then, my name is cleared?" "It has been officially for some time," the queen confirmed, "but you had vanished without a trace. Your father's house stood empty, his workshop abandoned. We feared the worst." At the mention of her father, Aveline's composure cracked. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "He died believing his daughter a thief and his legacy destroyed." The queen reached across to take Aveline's hand. "Master Thornwood knew you better than that, child. His heart failed him, yes, but it was not from shame. It was from fear for you." From the leather satchel she carried, the queen withdrew a sealed parchment and placed it on the table between them. "This was found among your father's effects. It is addressed to you, but as the seal is royal, it required my permission to be delivered. I've carried it these 7 months, hoping to place it in your hands myself." With trembling fingers, Aveline broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. As she read, color drained from her face. "This is a royal commission," she murmured. "For a wedding gown." "Yes," the queen confirmed. "For Lady Elizabeth Blackthorn's marriage to the Duke of Northumberland. The wedding is in 3 weeks' time." Edmund stepped forward, confusion evident on his face. "My sister's wedding? But the royal tailor has produced nothing worthy of the occasion," the queen interrupted. "Your sister specifically requested Aveline's work, even after the incident. She never believed the accusations against her." Turning back to Aveline, the queen's expression softened. "I come with 2 requests, Mistress Thornwood. First, that you return to court to complete this commission, which your father accepted before his passing. And second," she hesitated, an unusual vulnerability crossing her regal features, "that you consider taking your father's position permanently. England has lacked a master tailor of his caliber, and I have lacked a confidant of his discretion." The implication hung in the air. There had been more to Master Thornwood's role than simply creating beautiful garments. He had been a keeper of royal secrets, a trusted advisor in matters beyond fabric and thread. Aveline's eyes met Edmund's across the small room, and in that glance passed a lifetime of unspoken emotions, betrayal, regret, and the faintest glimmer of something that might with care and time blossom into forgiveness. I will create Lady Elizabeth's gown, Aveline said finally, returning her gaze to the Queen. As for the position, I must consider what is best for my future. The Queen nodded, satisfied. The royal carriage will return for you in 3 days. That should give you time to make arrangements. Rising, she added with unexpected gentleness, Your father would be proud, Aveline, not just of your skill, but of your strength. After the Queen departed, an awkward silence fell between Aveline and Edmund. They stood on opposite sides of the small room, the weight of their shared history pressing down upon them. Will you truly return to court? Edmund asked finally, his voice rough with emotion. After everything that happened there, Aveline moved to the window, watching as the royal carriage disappeared down the village's main street. I lost everything because of a lie, she said softly. My father, my reputation, my future. For 7 months, I've lived as a ghost, hiding, behind a veil of my own making. She turned to face him, her expression resolute. I will not hide any longer, Edmund. I will return to court not as a supplicant seeking forgiveness, but as Aveline Thornwood, master of my craft and heir to my father's legacy. And what of me? Edmund asked, taking a hesitant step toward her. What place do I have in this new future you envision? Aveline regarded him steadily, her eyes revealing the complexity of her feelings. You gave false testimony that destroyed my life, she said quietly. Yet you also sought me out to confess your wrong. Both actions speak to your character, though in different ways. She moved to the loose floorboard beneath her bed and withdrew the wooden box that contained her treasures. From it, she lifted the unfinished wedding gown she had begun for the Queen months ago. I will create a new gown for your sister, she said, her fingers caressing the fine silk. But I will incorporate elements of this design, the one your false testimony prevented me from completing. Every stitch will be a reminder of what was taken from me, and what I reclaimed through my own strength. Edmund watched her, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're using your art to tell our story. Not just our story, Aveline corrected. My story. The story of a woman who lost everything but her skill and her truth. Who lived in silence and shadow rather than compromise either. She carefully refolded the fabric and returned it to its box. Your sister's gown will be my finest creation, a testament to my father's teaching and my own mastery. And when it is complete, when Lady Elizabeth walks down the aisle draped in my art, all of court will see what was nearly lost forever through cruelty and falsehood. Edmund bowed his head, accepting the justice in her words. And after, will you take the Queen's offer? A ghost of a smile touched Aveline's lips. The court tailor knows every secret, Edmund. Every whispered confidence in fitting rooms, every hidden message embroidered into gifts between lovers or rivals. My father held those secrets sacred. Her eyes met his, challenging. Can the court be trusted with mine? Before he could answer, a knock sounded at the door. One of the Queen's attendants stood outside holding a sealed letter. Her Majesty asked that this be delivered to you, Sir Edmund, the young woman said with a curtsy. For your eyes only. When they were alone again, Edmund broke the royal seal and read the brief message. His expression shifted from surprise to understanding as he looked up at Aveline. It seems my future is decided as well, he said, extending the letter for her to read. The Queen has appointed me as envoy to the northern provinces. I am to depart immediately after Elizabeth's wedding. Aveline scanned the elegant handwriting, understanding the Queen's strategy. Edmund was being removed from court, whether as punishment or protection was unclear. 3 weeks, Aveline murmured, handing back the letter. 3 weeks to create a masterpiece that will restore my name and secure my future. She met his gaze directly. 3 weeks for you to prove whether your remorse is genuine or merely a salve for your conscience. Edmund accepted her challenge with a solemn nod. I cannot undo the past, Aveline. But I swear by all I hold sacred that I will spend every day of those 3 weeks, and beyond if you permit it, earning back the trust I destroyed. As he turned to leave, Aveline called after him, "Edmund." When he looked back, she added quietly, "The Queen said she always knew the truth. Remember that when you return to court. In that world of masks and pretenses, true sight is the rarest gift of all." Left alone, Aveline turned her attention to the royal commission that would mark her return from exile. With steady hands and a heart both wounded and healing, she began to plan the creation that would transform her from the veiled woman of Tharndale to the rightful heir of Master Thornwood's legacy. The gown would be magnificent, yes, but woven into its very fabric would be a story of betrayal, survival, and the quiet power of truth that no lie, however momentarily persuasive, could permanently obscure. The royal palace hummed with activity as servants hurried through corridors, arms laden with flowers, linens, and silver platters. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like miniature stars. In 3 hours, Lady Elizabeth Blackthorne would wed the Duke of Northumberland in a ceremony befitting their noble stations, uniting two of England's most powerful families. In a chamber set aside for the bride's preparations, Lady Elizabeth paced nervously, her chemise and petticoats rustling with each step. At 40, she was older than most brides, having refused numerous suitors over the years until the Duke, widowed 2 years prior, had finally won her heart with his quiet wisdom and genuine respect for her independence. "Where is she?" Elizabeth murmured, glancing again at the ornate clock on the mantel. "The ceremony is approaching and I cannot appear before the court half-dressed." As if summoned by her anxiety, a gentle knock sounded at the door. The lady's maid hurried to answer it, stepping back with a small gasp as Aveline Thornwood entered, carrying a large box wrapped in cream-colored silk. "Aveline." Elizabeth rushed forward, clasping the seamstress's hands with genuine warmth. "I feared you might not come." Aveline smiled, the first true smile to grace her features in many months. "I would never abandon a commission, my lady, especially not one for a woman who defended me when few others would." The 3 weeks since her return to court had been a strange mixture of triumph and tension. Many courtiers had welcomed her back with effusive apologies for believing the accusations against her, while others maintained a cool distance, unwilling to admit their error in judgment. The Queen had publicly restored her to favor, installing her in her father's former workshop and commissioning several new gowns to signal her complete rehabilitation. Edmund had kept his distance, respecting her need for space while making his support evident through small, thoughtful gestures, ensuring her workshop was stocked with the finest materials, defending her name when whispers arose, and once leaving a single thornwood rose on her work table with no note or explanation needed. Now, as Aveline placed the silk-wrapped box on a table and began to untie its ribbons, she felt a quiet sense of completion. This gown, created in stolen moments between official commissions, often by candlelight when the rest of the palace slept, represented more than a wedding garment. It was her declaration of who she was and what she had overcome. "I have never worked in such secrecy," she admitted to Elizabeth. "Not even your brother has seen the final design." Elizabeth's eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Edmund tells me you've created something unprecedented. He says your skill has only deepened during your absence." A shadow crossed Aveline's face at the delicate reference to her exile, but she pushed it aside. "Today is for joy, not bitter memories," she said firmly, lifting the lid of the box. "Are you ready to see your wedding gown, my lady?" The gasp that escaped Elizabeth's lips as Aveline carefully lifted the creation from its nest of tissue was precisely the reaction she had hoped for. The gown seemed to capture light itself, a masterpiece of ivory silk overlaid with delicate lace that Aveline had painstakingly created by hand. The bodice was embroidered with a pattern of thornwood roses, each petal articulated with threads of silver and the palest blue. The sleeves, fitted to the elbow before cascading to points that nearly touched the floor, were adorned with tiny freshwater pearls that caught the light with every movement. "It's magnificent," Elizabeth whispered, her fingers hovering above the fabric as if afraid to touch something so ethereal I've never seen its equal." Aveline smiled, professional pride momentarily overshadowing the deeper purpose behind her creation. "The design incorporates elements from every royal house of England," she explained, pointing to subtle motifs within the embroidery. "The roses represent your family, of course, but look closer. See how they twine with the Northumberland stars? Your past and future, united in harmony." With practiced efficiency, Aveline and the lady's maid helped Elizabeth into the gown. As the last button was secured and the train arranged in graceful folds, Aveline stepped back to assess her work. Elizabeth turned slowly before the mirror, tears welling in her eyes. "How can I ever thank you? This is beyond what I dreamed possible. Your belief in my innocence when others condemned me was gift enough," Aveline replied softly. Then, with a hint of mischief in her eyes, she added, "Though there is one more surprise." From the box, she withdrew a veil of such delicate lace it seemed spun from morning mist. "This was my mother's," she explained, her voice catching slightly. "My father preserved it after her death, intending it for my own wedding day. I would be honored if you would wear it." Elizabeth accepted the precious heirloom with trembling hands. "Aveline, I couldn't possibly—" "Please," Aveline insisted. "Let it be worn in joy today, rather than gathering dust while waiting for a bride who may never come." As the veil was carefully arranged over Elizabeth's dark hair, secured with pearl-tipped pins, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Edmund, come to escort his sister to the ceremony. He entered, resplendent in formal court attire, then stopped abruptly at the sight before him. "Elizabeth," he breathed, "you are transformed." His gaze shifted to Aveline, standing quietly to the side, and in that moment something passed between them, a recognition of beauty created from pain, of art forged in the crucible of suffering. "The Duke is the most fortunate of men," Edmund said, offering his arm to his sister, "and I the most fortunate of brothers to witness such grace." As the small procession prepared to depart for the chapel, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Lady Margaret Sutton, daughter of the Earl of Warwick and Elizabeth's chief rival at court, appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with excitement. "Elizabeth, you must come quickly." "Oh!" She halted, her eyes widening as she took in the bride's appearance. "What is that you're wearing?" The contempt in her voice was unmistakable, and Aveline stiffened, recognizing the tone of a woman who had likely been among those who had delighted in her downfall. Elizabeth, however, merely smiled serenely. "My wedding gown, Margaret. Created by Mistress Thornwood, the finest seamstress in England." Lady Margaret's lips twisted in a poor approximation of a smile. "Thornwood? The thief's daughter?" Her gaze raked over Aveline with undisguised disdain. "I would sooner wear rags than don a garment created by those fallen hands." Edmund stepped forward, his expression darkening, but Elizabeth placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Margaret has always been jealous of superior beauty, whether in a woman or a gown," she said lightly. "Pay her no mind, brother." But Lady Margaret was not so easily dismissed. Stepping closer to examine the gown, she reached out to touch the delicate lace at the sleeve. "I suppose it's adequate for a rushed commission, though I would have expected something more befitting your station, Elizabeth. This looks rather common to my eye." Before anyone could respond, the door opened, again to admit the Queen herself, come to bestow her personal blessing on the bride before the ceremony. "Lady Elizabeth," the Queen began, then stopped, her gaze traveling over the magnificent gown with evident appreciation. "My dear, you are a vision. Mistress Thornwood has outdone herself." Lady Margaret cursed deeply, her face a study and thwarted. "Plus, Your Majesty, I was just commenting on the unusual choice of seamstress given the circumstances." The Queen's expression cooled noticeably. "Were you indeed? How fortunate that I arrived in time to correct any misapprehensions." Turning to Aveline, she continued, "The gown is exceptional, Mistress Thornwood, perhaps the finest creation I have seen in my 30 years at court." The subtle emphasis on Aveline's proper title was not lost on anyone present. Lady Margaret's cheeks burned with humiliation as the Queen added pointedly, I look forward to seeing more of your work adorning our court. Talent such as yours must not be hidden away, unlike certain less admirable qualities I observe in others." With that royal rebuke hanging in the air, Lady Margaret had no choice but to retreat, her parting glare at Aveline promising future retribution if opportunity arose. When she had gone, the Queen turned to Edmund. "The chapel is prepared, Sir Edmund. I believe it is time to escort your sister to her future." The wedding procession formed with stately dignity, the Queen leading, followed by Edmund with Elizabeth on his arm, and various ladies in waiting, trailing behind. Aveline moved to take her place among the household staff who would observe from the back of the chapel, but the Queen halted her with a gesture. "Not there, Mistress Thornwood. Today you walk with us as befits the creator of such beauty." And so Aveline found herself processing through the grand corridors of the palace she had once fled in disgrace, now returning in triumph. Courtiers, lining the route, gasped audibly at Elizabeth's gown, their whispers following Aveline like a wave. "Thornwood's daughter, the one who was accused. Look what she has created." In the chapel, nobility from across England had gathered to witness the union. The Duke of Northumberland waited at the altar, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to awestruck wonder as his bride appeared. But it was not only Elizabeth who drew the court's attention, it was the gown itself, a creation so magnificent it seemed to embody the very essence of devotion and new beginnings. As the ceremony progressed, Aveline stood quietly among the Queen's ladies, her heart full with complex emotions. Pride in her work, yes, but also a deeper satisfaction in having reclaimed her place through the pure expression of her art. With each vow exchanged between bride and groom, she felt the bonds of her past loosening, making way for whatever future she might choose to create. When Elizabeth and her new husband turned to face the assembled nobility, a spontaneous murmur of appreciation rippled through the chapel. In that moment, illuminated by sunlight streaming through stained glass, the bride seemed to glow from within, a vision of timeless elegance clothed in the manifestation of Aveline's resilient spirit. "Who created such a masterpiece?" "Aveline," heard one noblewoman whisper to her companion. "I must have her for my daughter's wedding." "The Thornwood girl," came the reply. "The one we all wronged." As the wedding party processed out of the chapel to begin the celebrations, Edmund found himself walking beside Aveline. "You've won them all back," he murmured, nodding toward the admiring courtiers, "though they never deserved your art in the first place." Aveline's smile held a new confidence, the shadow of her exile finally beginning to recede. "I did not create the gown for them," she replied quietly. "I created it for your sister, who believed in me, for my father, whose legacy lives on in my hands, and for myself to prove that truth, like beauty, cannot be permanently obscured." As they emerged into the sunlit courtyard where tables had been arranged for the wedding feast, Edmund hesitated, then spoke the words that had remained unspoken between them. "And what of me, Aveline? Did you create any part of it for me?" Her eyes met his, clear and direct as they had been on the day she removed her veil in Tharndale Square. "Look closely at the pattern of roses on the bodice, Edmund. At their center, nearly invisible unless you know to look for it, is a single, blackthorn blossom, a reminder that even from betrayal something worthy can eventually bloom." Before he could respond, they were separated by the swirl of guests moving toward the banquet. But the knowledge of that hidden symbol, her private acknowledgement of the complex bond between them, remained with Edmund as he took his place at the high table, his gaze returning again and again to the woman whose artistry had transformed his sister's wedding into a triumph of the human spirit. Morning light filtered through the leaded glass windows of Master Thornwood's former workshop. Now rightfully restored to his daughter, 2 months had passed since Lady Elizabeth's wedding, and in that time Aveline's reputation had not merely recovered but soared to unprecedented heights. Noblewomen who had once whispered against her now competed for her attention, desperate to secure her services for their own gowns and those of their daughters. Aveline sat at her father's work table, fingers moving with practiced precision, as she completed the embroidery on a ceremonial robe for the queen. The pattern, thornwood, roses intertwined with symbols of the royal house, had become her signature, recognized and coveted throughout the court. Yet even as her hands created beauty, her mind wandered to the letter that had arrived that morning, bearing the seal of the northern provinces. Edmund would return today. His 3-month assignment as royal envoy had stretched to 6, then 8, as border disputes required his diplomatic skills. Their parting had been cordial but guarded, the fragile connection established at his sister's wedding insufficient to bridge the chasm of their past. Now, with his imminent return, Aveline found herself unexpectedly anxious, uncertain what place he might occupy in her carefully reconstructed life. A knock at the workshop door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting one of her apprentices, talented girls she had selected from among the palace servants, Aveline called, "Enter," without looking up from her work. "Your skill has only grown in my absence," came a familiar voice, deep and resonant. With a new warmth that caught her by surprise, Aveline's head snapped up, her needle poised mid-stitch. Edmund stood in the doorway, transformed from the man she remembered. The northern winds had burnished his features, lending him a rugged quality that contrasted with the refined elegance of his court attire. His eyes, those expressive blue eyes that had once condemned her with a glance, now regarded her with something akin to reverence. "Sir Edmund," she acknowledged, setting aside her work and rising to offer a formal curtsy. "The court welcomes your return." "And does Aveline Thornwood welcome it as well?" he asked quietly, remaining at the threshold as if uncertain of his right to enter her domain. The question hung between them, laden with 8 months of separation and years of complicated history. Aveline studied him, noting the new lines at the corners of his eyes and the slight silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. "Aveline Thornwood has learned to judge people by their actions, not their titles or their promises," she replied carefully. "Your sister writes that you served with distinction in the north." Edmund nodded, taking a tentative step into the workshop. "I tried to conduct myself with the honor my mother would have expected," he said, "and that you might respect." The simple admission, delivered without artifice, touched something in Aveline that she had thought long buried. She gestured to a chair near her work table, a silent invitation that Edmund accepted with evident gratitude. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small package wrapped in oiled cloth. "From the Scottish borderlands, the local women there create embroidery unlike any I've seen in England." Aveline unwrapped the gift, revealing scraps of linen adorned with intricate stitchwork and colors of remarkable vibrancy. "These are extraordinary," she breathed, running her fingers over the patterns. "The technique is I've never encountered. It's like the women guard their methods jealously," Edmund explained. "But when I mentioned your name, they insisted I bring these samples to you. Your reputation has traveled even to those remote villages." Pride warmed Aveline's cheeks. "My father always said that true art transcends borders and station," she murmured. "Thank you for this thoughtful gift." Edmund's expression sobered. "It's but a small token compared to what I took from you, Aveline." The reference to their shared past hung in the air between them, impossible to ignore yet difficult to address directly. Before either could speak further, a royal page appeared at the workshop door, bowing low. "Mistress Thornwood, Her Majesty requests your immediate presence in the Privy Chamber, and Sir Edmund as well," he added with another bow. Exchanging puzzled glances, they followed the page through the palace corridors, their steps unconsciously falling into rhythm as they navigated the familiar pathways of power. Court life continued around them. Noblemen engaged in political discussions, ladies exchanging the latest gossip, servants hurrying to fulfill their duties. But Aveline sensed a peculiar energy today, a suppressed excitement that manifested in furtive glances and hushed conversations. The Privy Chamber doors swung open to reveal not only the Queen, but also her closest advisors and several members of the royal family. Lady Elizabeth and her husband stood near the window, their expressions suggesting they were privy to whatever occasion had prompted this unusual gathering. "Ah, Mistress Thornwood, Sir Edmund," the Queen greeted them, her tone warm yet formal. "How fortuitous that you should both be available at this significant moment." Aveline curtsied deeply, her mind racing through possibilities. Had new accusations arisen? Was her position once again in jeopardy? But the Queen's benevolent smile dispelled such fears. "Aveline Thornwood," the Queen continued, "for 8 months you have served this court with distinction, creating garments that bring honor to England when worn before foreign dignitaries. Your art speaks not merely of beauty, but of the dignity and heritage of our realm." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled nobles. Even those who had once shunned Aveline now nodded approvingly, won over by the undeniable mastery displayed in her creations. The Queen gestured to a page who stepped forward bearing a velvet cushion. Upon it rested a golden needle, its eye inlaid with tiny diamonds that caught the light with every movement. "This," the Queen explained, "is the symbol of the Royal Master of the Needle, an honor bestowed only 6 times in England's history and never before to a woman." Her gaze swept the chamber, challenging anyone to object. Yet who among us can deny that Aveline Thornwood has earned this distinction through both her incomparable skill and her unwavering character? Stunned silence gave way to applause as the Queen lifted the golden needle and presented it to Aveline, whose hands trembled slightly as she accepted the extraordinary honor. "Your Majesty," she whispered, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition, "I am humbled beyond words." "No, child," the Queen corrected gently. "You are elevated by merit, not humbled by charity. This position is yours by right of talent." As the ceremony concluded and courtiers pressed forward to offer congratulations, Aveline found herself standing beside Edmund, who watched her with undisguised pride. "You have achieved what no woman before you has done," he said quietly, "not through patronage or birth, but through the strength of your own hands and heart." "A strange journey from the veiled woman of Tharndale," Aveline replied, the memory of those dark days now softened by her triumphant return. Edmund's expression grew serious. "I leave again tomorrow," he said, the announcement catching her by surprise. "The Queen has appointed me permanent ambassador to the Northern Territories. It is a suitable distance from court, where my past mistake might be gradually forgotten." Understanding dawned in Aveline's eyes. Though her name had been cleared and her position secured, the Queen had chosen to remove the source of her former suffering. Whether as punishment for Edmund or protection for Aveline remained unclear. "When will you return?" she asked, surprised by the hollow feeling his impending departure evoked. "Perhaps at Michaelmas, perhaps Christmas," he replied. "The appointment is for a year, possibly longer." Around them, the celebration continued, but they stood in a pocket of stillness, the future stretching before them with its uncertain paths. "I have something for you as well," Aveline said suddenly, making a decision. "If you would accompany me to my chambers." Minutes later, they stood in Aveline's private rooms, modest compared to those of most courtiers but elegant in their simplicity. From a cedar chest, she withdrew a bundle of black fabric, the veil she had worn during her exile in Tharndale. "This once concealed my shame," she said, placing it in Edmund's hands. "Now I would have it serve as a reminder of the truth we both learned at such cost." Edmund accepted the veil reverently, understanding the significance of her gesture. "What truth?" "Is that, Aveline?" "That we are more than our worst mistakes," she replied, her voice soft yet firm. "That redemption is possible, even from the deepest betrayal." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the last walls between them began to crumble. Edmund took a step closer, close enough that Aveline could see the play of emotions across his face. Regret, hope, and something deeper that made her heart quicken. "I have loved you since the day you showed me your first embroidery sample," he confessed, the words rushing out as if he feared losing courage. "I betrayed that love out of cowardice, choosing to protect Catherine rather than stand for truth. There is no forgiveness adequate for such a failing. Yet I find myself hoping." Aveline pressed her fingers gently to his lips, silencing him. 8 months ago, I told you that you had given me pain, and that you would see what I did with it. Now you have your answer." She gestured around them, to the golden needle pinned at her bodice, and the respect she had reclaimed through her art. "I transformed it into beauty and strength." Her hand moved from his lips to his cheek, the first intentional touch she had offered him since their reunion. "Perhaps it is time we discover what might be created from something other than pain." Edmund's breath caught, his eyes searching hers. "Aveline, are you saying—" "I am saying that the past is sewn shut. It seems secured," she interrupted, a small smile softening her features. "The future lies before us like unmarked fabric, waiting for the patterns we choose to create." With infinite tenderness, Edmund reached for her, drawing her into an embrace that spoke of years of longing and months of repentance. When their lips met, it was not with the desperate passion of young lovers, but with the measured certainty of two souls who had traversed darkness and emerged into hard-won light. Later that evening, as court prepared for the banquet celebrating Aveline's unprecedented appointment, she stood at her chamber window, watching the sunset gild the palace gardens. The black veil, now cleaned and folded with care, lay in the cedar chest, not discarded, but preserved as a testament to her journey. Not as a symbol of shame, she murmured to herself, but of survival. Edmund appeared at her side, resplendent in formal attire for the evening's festivities. "What was that?" he asked, offering his arm to escort her to the great hall. Aveline smiled, accepting his arm with a grace born of her restored confidence. "I was remembering something I once told myself in Tharndale, during the darkest days of my exile. We construe our own histories, even with broken threads." As they walked together toward the celebration that awaited, Aveline Thornwood, no longer hidden behind a veil but adorned with the golden symbol of her mastery, reflected on the intricate tapestry that had brought her to this moment. From royal tailor's daughter to disgraced exile, from silent seamstress to the first woman honored as royal master of the needle, her life had unfolded with unexpected patterns and colors, and now, with Edmund at her side and her future secured, by her own remarkable talent, she understood that the most beautiful creations often emerged from the most challenging beginnings, just as the finest embroidery required both light and shadow to achieve its full splendor. Aveline Thornwood's journey reminds us that our greatest creations often emerge from our deepest wounds. Behind her veil, she carried not just her pain but her extraordinary talent, a gift that neither betrayal nor exile could diminish. What would you do if everything you loved was taken from you in an instant? Would you find the courage to remove your own veil and reclaim your true identity? In a world quick to judge and slow to forgive, Aveline teaches us that true redemption requires more than mere words. It demands action, transformation, and the bravery to face those who once condemned us. Edmund's path shows us that even those who cause great harm can find their way back to honor, though the journey may be long and the price considerable. As Aveline said, we construe our own histories, even with broken threads. What pattern will you stitch with the threads of your own life? If this tale of love, betrayal, and ultimate triumph touched your heart, please follow our channel for more powerful medieval stories that illuminate the enduring truths of the human spirit. Share this journey with others who might find courage in Aveline's resilience. And leave a comment telling us which moment in her remarkable story resonated most deeply with you. Like all great tales, hers continues beyond the final words, in the lives she touches and the hearts she inspires.